Okay, great. Well, we've had some very passionate presentations by people who are extremely active, not only the academic research end, but also in the helping be on the front lines of trying to solve a lot of these issues. I thought, I think the Asia Society, Kristen, do you know the Asia Society, is it called the Green Project? Michael, because if you go to the Asia Society website from New York, they have a big environmental program, and they have a lot of very dramatic pictures also, like the Tibetan glaciers and so on. That's another source of visual information that you can use. And a couple of comments. I mean, just to get the ball rolling, and we have 20 minutes, so we can have discussion before we break. On Tom Klitgard, I didn't know, having a lawyer, we were going to have a stand-up comedian. That's the last thing that I thought. But you know, sociologists making jokes is bad and is unsurprising enough. But as a sociologist, I'm required to mention the name Max Weber at least once a day, and so here it comes. Yesterday I didn't, so I could say it twice today. Weber talks distinguishes between formal and substantive rationality, going to your points of rational versus reasonable. And so to put a sociological spin on what you were saying, so formal rationality would be your constitution, which would be the rules, the principles that you talked about. But substantive rationality would be deciding what's in it for me, what's rational for me. Should I implement these rules or not? So when we were talking, like yesterday, I guess when Rosie was talking about stakeholders and so on, the idea is, oh yeah, those are the rules, but in terms of our economy and some of the slides that Wei Tai just put up, it's, oh yeah, that may be reasonable at one level, but irrational at one level, maybe reasonable or not reasonable. But in terms of our economy, in terms of my political power, challenging my power, it's not rational to implement those things. So rational also has these different kinds of aspects. And this gets us back to the topic, one of the topics yesterday is the role of the Communist Party. And China's a top-down system. So we could talk about the state and the state constitution, but it's also important to remember that China, the Communist Party, even though lately it says that no one is above the law, the Communist Party really is above and outside the law. And it is a law unto itself, and it has its own constitution, and it's a highly secretive organization, a mafia kind of organization, some people would say. And so no matter what the leadership may say about the state constitution, there's a whole separate reality in the political system, the way that China operates, about whether these laws are, who are these laws going to apply to. And one of the things that Xi Jinping is trying to do is to say, oh, they apply to everybody. That's what he's saying. But we talked yesterday about the corruption issue, and that also came up today. Just reading some of my email traffic before we began today, apparently there is now a counter move against the corruption crackdown by a lot of these stakeholders within the party in particular. We're saying, you know, it's nice to talk about we should crack down on these big tigers and so on, but this thing has to stop because it's not only our own interests, but the legitimacy of the party, the party's power, and the country as well. So just a few thoughts on rationality. Also, I think, Wei Tai, I don't know the details, but you would, about all these, the U.S. has participated in a number of these global climate discussions, but doesn't sign anything, right? No. So that's also a question of principle, rational, reasonable, and so on. So one issue that I wonder if we could discuss, and this is, I think, where Kristen's work in particular is so important, is we've talked about energizing ourselves and our students, our society, to be aware of these issues, that we need to work with the Chinese, and this came out yesterday in the Consul General's presentation as well, about win-win, and we can all solve these problems together. What role might there be, not only for Chinese citizens, but also for Americans and other people in the international community, to address the environmental crisis in China? So we've all emphasized the fact that it's not just Chinese, but it has global implications. How can we understand or even predict what the Chinese Communist Party will permit? What space is there for us and for the Chinese people themselves? Because you're there on the front lines working at the grassroots. And the Pacific environments had a lot of success. But when you talk about building a network, that's one of the things that the Communist Party, I keep saying, we have to think about the party versus the government. The party is very worried about networks outside of party control. That's one reason they're so suspicious of religion, like Falun Gong. This is a network, and they're using the internet because they're worried about an alternative source of power. Yesterday I mentioned a monopoly of truth. They're worried about other people having alternative values, alternative ways of thinking of things. So I'm going to open just some comments on. There's a mic there, Tom. Why don't you?
I think the real issue in China, Tom, first of all, it's a terrific question. What's happening in China is the internet and the cell phone. And you can't run a repressive government if people can talk to each other on the cell phone. That's a huge, huge change, an exchange of information. But all their constitutional protections of freedom of speech are all what I call have an escape clause, subject to law. In our Constitution, our basic rights are not subject to law. There's no thing that says in there they're subject to law. Not so in China. And the other thing about the Chinese Constitution is your rights are totally ephemeral because the Constitution can be amended at any time by the National People's Congress. There's no separate constituency out there you got to go to and get their approval. So their Constitution is just like legislation. And whatever the flavor of the day is today, they can make it that. But I think that essentially when people can communicate, that undermines any totalitarian government. And the greatest experiments, and I'll just make this one comment, in the world, history is going on right now in Hong Kong and to a lesser extent in Macau, because we started with feudalism, then capitalism, then communism, socialism. Communism evolved into socialism. And now the Chinese are trying to blend that together or to accommodate it some way in the next to 2047 in Hong Kong. And that's going to set the tone for what happens in Taiwan. They're looking around, and so are the people in Myanmar and everywhere else to see how the Chinese are dealing with these freedoms. So to me, if you and I were you're the premier and I'm just your humble servant, but we're sitting up there having a Mao Tai or something, and we're saying, how are we going to keep in power? We say we got to deal with this internet. We can't have these people talking to each other. That's dangerous for us, because once the idea gets out there, how are you going to stop it? You see, and I bring up just two other things, graphic things. The great picture of Tiananmen was the tank stopping in front of the person standing in front of the tank. But what's never mentioned is the tank stopped. It didn't run over him. Now, what does that tell you? Does that tell you anything? And the other thing was Zhao Ziyang, who was the president of China. They had a picture of him down in Macau playing golf with his golf pants on. Does that tell you anything about how he got out too far ahead of the crowd and he got relieved, got removed? So I think that the real issue is, as I say, the communication. And the one thing I wanted to just bring up, we have to recognize, we Americans, teachers, you have to recognize how careful the Chinese are and have been over the years in learning our customs and traditions. And I'll give you two examples. About 10 years ago, I was invited to lunch out at the Balboa Cafe on Balboa Street in San Francisco with Dick Blum, Diane's husband. And what he had was a delegation from China of religious people from the Chinese ministry who were going down to Atlanta to study how churches were set up and administered in the United States. And they went down there for 6 weeks or 8 weeks just to study administration. They were thinking ahead when religion would have more of a force in China. The other thing, about 10 years, about the same time, a group came from China here to San Francisco to study the Filipino community, how the Philippine community in San Francisco has its own customs, has its own laws, its own controls, and so forth. And they were studying the Philippine community out in the Mission District and so forth to see how they could deal with foreigners in China who were living in Shanghai and Beijing and other places. What mechanisms were in force for resolving disputes, what for cultural, so on. So what I'm saying is they're thinking way, way ahead. When we normalized our relations with China, the Chinese government sent over a delegation and they copied every single patent in our patent office. I'm a patent lawyer part-time. Even though they were from 1820, they just copied everything so they had that knowledge base, you see. And so what point am I making? The Chinese government and the Chinese people are very, very careful as to what they're doing. And so when they talk about the environment, like their new court, they're learning how to do it, or the new environmental laws, they're learning how to do it. Hey, you got to go. I lived for a while in Los Angeles. You couldn't even see the mountains down there. My wife used to wake up in the morning and she'd say, I hear the birds coughing. I say, what do you mean? She says, we got to get back to San Francisco. Anyway, that's...
Anybody else want to respond, or do you want to open it up?
I just had a few quick ideas about your question about what can students do. I think that any chance they might have to actually get over to China. I know there's different programs that students can get involved in, but there's just so much more of a need for mutual understanding. There will be more and more in the future. Maybe even 1990 Institute has some good leads on student programs. But I think also, on the environmental side, there's really similar, Thomas is sort of saying it's very different over there, and I'm kind of like, no, it's all the same. But that everything is true, right? We heard everything you could say about China is true at some level. But the way that decisions are made locally, it's a set of actors, possibly rational actors, possibly irrational actors, but often sort of acting with their own self-interest, or sometimes bigger interests in mind. And I think that helping students understand how decisions get made around the environment could be really critical. I was just thinking about some of the big debates here in California around sort of placement of solar energy installations, or things like farmers versus the fish out in the Central Valley, with the drought going on right now. These really thorny problems where it's like it's not a clear-cut decision. It's really difficult to solve. And these are a lot of the same kinds of challenges that China is going through right now. So, finding sort of parallels with these, it's not just about, of course we want the fish to survive, but does that mean we want to put all the farmers out of work? No. So how do you then create a decision-making process around how much water gets to stay in the San Joaquin or gets to stay in Sacramento versus how much gets used for farming? That I think it helps students understand better kind of why things are so challenging in China, because a lot of the same issues are going on. Students often don't need inspiration or a reason to get involved. They're just doing stuff on their own. I'm sure you have a lot of budding environmental activists in your classrooms. The Brower Youth Awards is a really wonderful event that happens every year in San Francisco. It's an award that was named after David Brower, who founded the Sierra Club and did a bunch of other great environmental work. And it's super inspiring. It's all kids that are under 21, at the age of 21 or 22, that have done some amazing project on their own. And I think a lot of the high school students classrooms go, they usually provide free tickets for students to go to that. 350.org does a lot of student outreach and has a lot of student organizing materials. So if you have students that are really interested in getting involved in sort of global climate issue in particular, I think that's a good resource. So that's 350.org.
So we have 5 or so minutes for questions or comments. Priority, of course, go to teachers. Yep. And you can either ask a general question or address your question to a particular person. I see that Tom Finger has entered the house. So if people had follow-up questions they wanted to ask him yesterday, he'll be great. Glad you could join us.
A two-part question. I teach 8th grade middle school social studies, and we teach the Constitution, and how our Constitution was written and how it is enforced and how we hold our government officials accountable for that. How can the Chinese people hold their government accountable to their Constitution? You presented a lot of those different constitutional questions and things. How can they hold the government accountable to that, and then the government hold the people accountable to that too? And then the second part is, you talk about social media and media organizing people. How has that played a role in a lot of the NGOs or other organizations to try to get people, specifically youth, involved in making changes in environmental and other policies?
In China, the people cannot hold the government responsible under the Constitution, because to do that, the only way you can do it is to become a member of the party and make the change that way. Judges in China cannot decide constitutional questions. So you can't bring a lawsuit in court and have say this is constitutional or unconstitutional. The other thing, at the end of the line, the National People's Congress, or the Standing Committee essentially, decides what's constitutional. That's right in the Constitution. They make the decision. So the people can't hold them responsible. But what the danger is, when you have a constitution like that, like they have, it creates expectations in the people. And that's the real risk of saying something and then not doing it. So in the United States, we have dumped all over our veterans from Afghanistan, and you just read the newspapers. In China, right in their constitution, there's an obligation to take care of veterans, to give them priorities. And they have a whole, it's like a statute. So how they hold them accountable, essentially they can't. The government can hold the people accountable, because this is right in the Constitution preamble, in every place, they have a duty to obey the Constitution. So if you and I are the head of the government, we can, that's a pretty vague statement. We can say, well, you're not obeying the Constitution, and we just pass a law, or whatever to do it. So that's the big difference. You have to think of China in two ways. First of all, it's not a legal system, their constitution. It's an administrative system. We have a legal system with a balance of power. They don't. The judges are just administrators of the central government. The other thing is, to have an effective legal system, you need to have lawyers, regardless of whether they're effective or not. But in China, there are, right, according to, depends on to whom you speak, there may be 200,000 lawyers right now for 1 billion people, 1,000,000,003 people. In the United States, we have over 1,101,000 lawyers for 300 million people. So it's quite a difference of people. And also in China, if I were to go further, and I would just go further, judges can be prosecuted for bending the law or for making a decision inconsistent with the law or the facts. So can arbitrators. So what that means is that the government decides, if it loses a case, who bent the law, okay? And who bent the law was some guy that was appointed by the central government with no power, no tenure, nothing. So am I reaching you with the context? So what you do have an administrative system. It's kind of a gloss. They need a gloss. Again, you and I are where's my vice premier? What we're doing, we've got to have a gloss out there. And whether we're going to follow it or not is something else again, but we got to have something that we can point to and say, hey, oh yeah, we slipped up a little bit. We didn't do it right this time, but we'll do it next time. So, but that's the basic difference in the Constitution. And our and again, let me just add one footnote to that. In the Philippines, in other countries, in Japan, we wrote the Constitution for Japan. Colonel Cades, after World War II, sat down in a week and wrote Japan's Constitution. Korea has a constitution. It's more or less adopted by the people. Philippines do. Indonesia. In any constitution, there has to be a buy-in by the people to a certain degree. You see, in free countries, there's more of a buy-in than there is in the communist countries. And so that's a problem with China. Even if you never bought into it, they're telling you this is what it is. So that's a structural issue. When you understand that, you got the whole picture. The best constitution in that whole region, which is the model for, should be the model for Afghanistan and Iraq, is the Constitution of Malaysia, where they have rotating presidents, or yugongs. And it's a provincial, Malaysia has a bicameral legislature and state legislatures. And so there's a shifting of power. But that's on another subject on another day. But your question is really good. And when someone comes here and tells you, we have constitutional rights in China, yeah, you have freedom of speech as long as it doesn't offend the government. Because remember Article 54 I read to you? It said you can't interfere with the interests of the government. The state comes first. So turn in your passport, please.
Let's thank all these speakers for a fantastic morning. Thank you.